The Alchemist Art Shop presents.
Okay, first thing, we're going to draw the face on the lid of the box. You can use a pencil, but I'm using a marker just to make it easier for everybody to see what I'm doing. Next, flip the lid over and use either the flat brush that came with your kit or a paper towel and wet the back of the lid. This helps reduce warping from all the moisture in the paper mache later. Next, grab the school glue and use the flat brush to cover the front of the lid with school glue and leave that aside to dry for a few minutes. Let's mix the paper mache while that dries. Be careful not to inhale any of the dust during this process. Start with about half of the paper mache in the baggie and add a little less than a quarter of a cup of warm water to it. Then, with your fingers, mix it up very thoroughly, again being careful not to inhale the dust, until it forms a ball. Let's start adding paper mache. Start by building up paper mache around the features of the face. If your fingers feel too sticky, you can dip them in some water and gently tap that on the paper mache that you've laid down. We'll do multiple layers of paper mache, so don't worry about getting all of the details sculpted in this first round. Things like the septum and the nose, the little piece that goes up the middle, or things like teeth, if you decide to add those, save those for your second layer. It'll be a lot easier that way. Use the wooden tool from the kit to reach smaller areas where your fingers don't fit. And don't forget that you can move things around as much as you need to make things easier to reach. When you feel like you're finished with the first layer, put it aside to dry. You can also speed up the drying time by putting it in front of a small fan. Don't forget to wet the back so things don't warp. Start applying the second layer. Start with some of the small details like the septum of the nose. Use your wooden tool to get into the small areas where fingers won't fit easily. Our design is kind of wrinkly, especially around the mouth, so don't forget to add some of that texture in. When you're totally satisfied with your second layer, put it aside to dry. This part is optional, but I'm going to add some stitches to mine. Start with some fresh paper mache and lay down kind of a worm shape where you want the stitches to be. Then with the embroidery floss from the kit, lay it across the little worm you made and tuck in the edges of the embroidery floss with a little bit of extra paper mache pulp. Use your fingers or the wooden tool to hide the ends of the embroidery floss. The stitches look better when they're a little uneven or mismatched. You can even crisscross stitches if you like. Experiment and see what you think looks best. Press small pieces of paper mache into the sides of the lid. However, avoid the hinge side. Don't get any there. Now that everything's dry, use the sandpaper to clean up the hinge side of the lid. Make sure there's nothing on there, and the back. You can also sand smooth any rough spots on the face. I'm using red, black, and brown paints thinned with water, and just mixing them with the flat brush on the lid as I work. I'm applying them quickly and I'm not being very particular about it. I just want to make sure that I'm not leaving any uncovered white bits of paper mache behind. I'm mixing as I work, and that means that the final color will be a little bit uneven, and that's exactly what we want because it looks much more realistic that way. We're also going to paint in a few layers, so don't worry too much if this layer is a little bit see-through or not exactly the way you want it to look. It's just the base coat. When you're done with the first coat of paint, set it aside to dry. Remember, you can put it in front of a fan to speed things up. After the first coat of paint dried, it was time for the second, so I got the brown paint out again. This time I didn't thin it, and I'm applying it pretty much all over the lid and adding a little bit of the still diluted black paint, especially at the corners and inside the eyes, nose, and mouth. The brown paint will fix almost any problem at this point, so if you're not sure what to do, add a little bit more brown paint to it and it'll probably look better when it dries. Now I'm painting in some lines and wrinkles around the face with diluted black paint and the round brush. If you paint a line and feel like it's too dark, you can easily fix this by dipping your paintbrush in water and going back over the line, and that should blend it out pretty nice. To paint the tooth, I mixed some yellow and white paint in my palette. It's probably 2 or maybe 3 times as much white as yellow paint. Then I used the flat brush to paint the tooth, and then I used the round brush with some of the diluted black to clean up the lines. Next, I painted the eyes. I did the same thing, but I used red paint instead of yellow to create this pink outer iris color. And then I'm going back in with more pure red while everything is still wet so that it blends together. To emphasize the stitches, I'm using a diluted black and the round brush and just tracing the stitches with my brush. You could use whatever color you prefer though. Let it dry. I used the red, black, and brown to paint the rest of the cover, just like I did the lid. When that dried, I used the white paint and the flat brush to paint the pages white. Let the white paint dry. Next, I wanted to age the pages, so I made a very, very thin wash of brown paint and brushed it on with the flat brush, and I just brushed it until it was spread out. It doesn't have to be totally even because it actually looks a little bit better if it's just a bit splotchy, especially if it's a little darker toward the edges or the corners. And don't forget to do the inside too. Let it dry. Use the ruler and the gold gel pen to draw several parallel lines to look like the pages of a book. On the long edge of the book, it helps to alternate which direction you start the line from with each one. But on the shorter ends, make sure each line starts at the spine of the book. Now it's time to seal the lid with Mod Podge. I also used Mod Podge on the pages of the book, which did create some yellowing, but personally I think that it looks more realistic that way. Let it dry. Now put the hinges back in and it's all done.